between two members of the Utah and two members of United for Social Justice. The members from your left to right are of the Revolutionary Students Union. He's working on a master's degree at Utah Valley University. Will Van Wagenen, editor of the Mormon Worker. Michael Sanchez, co-chairman of the Utah Minutemen Project. And Eli Colley, chairman of the board of the Utah Minutemen Project. I'll explain how this conversation is going to work. For the first 40 minutes or so, each of the panelists is going to be given 10 minutes to speak and to talk about his views on immigration. The order will be, Will Van Wagenen will go first, Michael Sanchez will go second, Gregory Lucero will go third, and Eli Colley will be last. After that, there'll be a 5-minute time period for each person to respond to what was said during the first segment, first 40 minutes approximately segment. After that, each of the two groups has submitted questions, 4 of which from each side will be asked. For each question, the panelists will be given 2 minutes to respond, and then there'll be a 1-minute rebuttal. After those questions are asked, we will go into a Q&A session, a question and answer session, in which you will ask the panelists questions. We're asking that we try to alternate between those who would support the Utah Minutemen Project's position, those who would support the United for Social Justice position on immigration, and those who may be in between. When you ask your questions, please be concise and to the point. You'll be able to ask one question, there will be no follow-up questions. I may follow up with a question if there hasn't been clarity in the answer. Please be considerate of other people. Don't clap or boo while people are speaking. We can clap or boo at the end if you like. Though this is a library, some people think of a library as a quiet place. We know from other debates that have taken place here, we can have rigorous dialogue and even some conflict without becoming uncivil. Let's try to respect that this evening. So, to start, Will Van Wagenen, you have 10 minutes to give your presentation.
Opponents of undocumented immigration claim that, quote, illegal aliens are invading America, causing a new wave of crime, stealing jobs from American workers, committing widespread identity theft, and bankrupting our government-run social service programs. While it is true that undocumented immigration causes some of the problems I just mentioned, or while it is true that undocumented immigration causes some problems, they are not the problems I just mentioned. Further, the problems undocumented immigration actually does cause can be easily solved through a legalization program that would divert illegal flows through legal channels. This is a much better approach than wasting money to deport undocumented workers and militarize the border. Let me first go through some of those false problems that I just mentioned, and after that I'll talk about some of the real problems that undocumented immigration causes, and then about the solution. So is there a wave of immigrant crime? There are many, many studies that show that as immigration increases in a certain city, both legal and undocumented immigration, that the violent crime rate actually drops. Places like Los Angeles, Phoenix, etc. By the way, I've got citations for everything that I'm saying today, so if either in the question and answer period or afterwards, if you want to come and figure out where I'm getting my sources, I'd be happy to provide those. Secondly, are undocumented immigrants invading our country? An invasion is when an army comes, invades the country, uses weapons and violence, kills people, steals land, etc. Now that's to say that someone invaded our country, that's a good description of what the European settlers did when they came to this continent, but it's not a good description of what undocumented immigrants are doing. They're coming here peacefully, they're not killing anybody, they're not stealing anyone's land, they're just here to work and make a living for themselves and their families. The next point is, are undocumented immigrants stealing jobs? James Smith, who was a senior economist at the Rand Corporation, which is a very, very conservative think tank linked to the government. It's not like some socialist organization by any stretch of the imagination. This guy, James Smith, senior economist at the Rand Corporation, stated that, quote, "No credible estimate exists that shows immigrants cause unemployment. This is because with increases in low-skilled immigration, the U.S. economy expands, creating more jobs in higher-skilled areas. As a result, some U.S. workers now in low-paying jobs would move up to these better-paying jobs and actually reduce the wage pressure on low-skilled U.S. workers who remain in those low-skilled jobs." So it's wrong to think of there being a finite number of jobs in the economy, and each time an undocumented worker takes a job, that then steals a job from an American worker. What about lowering wages? That is, well, let me just quote this. According to a Wall Street Journal survey, 81% of economists believe that undocumented workers lower wages for skilled workers only slightly or not at all. So there is some effect there, but it's not a catastrophic effect that is causing mass unemployment and causing native low-skilled workers to be getting paid, half of what they otherwise would be. Additionally, by enforcing laws with businesses saying that they can't hire undocumented workers, trying to enforce that, basically what companies do, a lot of them, is turn to contract work. They don't want to be responsible for hiring these workers directly because they can get prosecuted under the law for that. So they hire contractors who take that risk, hire these undocumented workers and native workers. Those contractors take a cut of the wages and also pay these people in cash. So that encourages more and more workers, both illegal and undocumented, to not pay taxes as they should. So that's a direct consequence of trying to enforce these laws against employers, and it leads actually to lower wages for workers. That's been the case since 1986 when IRCA was passed. So the key is not to prevent low-skilled immigrants from entering the job market, but rather to improve the social safety net, education, and unemployment benefits for low-skilled native workers who have difficulty finding employment, as well as promoting unionization to increase wages for all workers. Next, are undocumented immigrants bankrupting our social services? The Congressional Budget Office notes that, quote, "The net impact of the unauthorized population on state and local budgets is most likely modest." So there is a cost to pay for education and emergency medical care for undocumented immigrants, but again, it's modest. It's not bankrupting our system. In addition, undocumented workers pay a lot of money to the federal government in Social Security and Medicare taxes that they will then never see and never get any benefit from. So undocumented workers contribute a lot to the Social Security fund, basically keeping Social Security solvent for the native workers, even though, again, these workers won't see any benefit from that. Roughly $7 billion a year gets contributed by these workers to this fund. So even though undocumented immigrants do impose a burden on state and local governments, they contribute a lot of money to the federal government. So again, the response to this problem should not be to just deport all these undocumented immigrants, but rather to force the federal government to pitch in and help out with education and emergency medical costs. A lot of people are upset at the idea that undocumented workers don't pay taxes. That's not true. 6 million undocumented workers file income tax returns every year, and again, they do pay a lot of Social Security taxes. That being said, there's also a lot of undocumented workers that don't pay taxes. They do work under the table, they get cash, etc. But again, the response isn't to waste a lot of money trying to deport these people. The solution is to legalize them, give them a tax ID so that they can get an above-the-table job and go ahead and start paying the taxes, go ahead and start paying their fair of taxes. The next problem that's often cited in regards to undocumented workers is identity theft. Undocumented workers, again, because of that rule starting with in 1986 with the law that was passed called IRCA, employers have to verify that workers have a Social Security number. So obviously undocumented workers, they get a fake Social Security number so that they can work and pay taxes. Now, that is very, very different from identity theft. Identity theft is when you get not only someone's social security number, you also get their name, you get their address, their date of birth, you try to access their bank accounts online, you try to take out loans in their name, take out credit cards in their name, which you just run up a bill of a couple $1,000s and never pay back and ruin someone else's credit. If you are just working on someone else's social security number and you don't even know whose social security number that is, again, really all it's doing is allowing you to pay taxes, which actually helps the federal government. Now, there are a few minor problems that do result from that, which we can go into perhaps later. But again, the solution would be to legalize these workers, give them a tax ID number so that they don't need to take someone else's social security number and use that to work. So legalization, again, is the solution rather than deportation. So what are the real problems with undocumented immigration? There are a lot of needless deaths that result from undocumented immigration. By militarizing the border, the flow of undocumented migrants has not decreased at all. However, this has pushed migrants from trying to cross the border in urban areas to having to cross in more rural, desert, dangerous areas, and this has led to more deaths. For example, in 2005, a total of 472 migrants died while attempting to cross the border, just because we insist on militarizing it rather than legalizing and allowing people to come and work. The next problem is exploitation. How much time do I have?
1 minute.
Because undocumented workers have no legal rights, they have no redress when employers steal their wages or sexually harass them. They are often fired or reported to ICE officials to be deported for attempting to organize unions or for complaining about unsafe work conditions. Because undocumented labor is underground, it allows literally slave-like conditions to flourish. Many undocumented workers could perhaps be better described as indentured servants or slaves. So again, the way to prevent that type of slavery is not to militarize the border and deport these people, but rather legalize them and allow them to work in the above-ground economy. So I'll just go ahead and finish up and say there's a few things that I had to leave out, but that undocumented immigration is not a threat to our nation. There are big problems with the status quo, but what needs to happen again is legalization so that workers can form unions, so that there's both undocumented immigrants and workers and also native workers can both have the chance to fight for better working conditions and better wages rather than having the working class divided and allowing big business to exploit undocumented labor as they're able to do currently.
Next, Michael Sanchez.
In honor, if you came in here next Monday, you would come in to hear some World War II veterans. So in honor of these World War II veterans that have, in my opinion, given us this freedom to have this discussion, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And so battle lines are drawn.
Thank you. My name is Michael Sanchez. I'm an American, a proud American of proud American and Mexican heritage. I am second generation. I am that son of an immigrant who became a citizen. We, the Utah United Groups and Utah Minuteman Project, are concerned with people entering into our country, our state. We want them to do so with dignity and respect and safety. The illegal alien issue is connected to migrant smuggling, human trafficking, and slavery. It is connected to organized crime. These crimes strip people of their rights, ruin their dreams, rob them of dignity. These crimes shame us all. Virtually every country in the world is affected by these crimes. Human trafficking is a global problem, and no country is immune. Millions of victims are entrapped and exploited every year in this modern form of slavery. Slavery, forced labor, has returned to our nation, our world, with a demonic vengeance. With a demand for cheap labor, the age-old mantra, without it our economy will fail, our plantations will fail, our nation will fall. Smuggled migrants are vulnerable to life-threatening risk, exploitation. Thousands of people have suffocated in containers, perished in deserts, or dehydrated at sea, drowned. Generating huge profits for the criminals involved, migrant smuggling fuels corruption and powers organized crime. Transnational organized crime is considered one of the major threats to human security, impeding the social, economic, political, and cultural development of societies worldwide. It is a multifaceted phenomenon and has manifested itself in different activities, among others, drug trafficking, trafficking in human beings, trafficking in firearms, smuggling of migrants, money laundering. These crimes against humanity contribute billions of dollars to organized crime cartels. These cartels are engaged in the destruction of countries. Mexico is a crime hole. Mexico, a country of hopes and dreams. They do this by executing their people and corrupting her government. The true villains in the illegal alien issue are the criminals and businesses who exploit desperate people. These villains seek to undermine the jobs of American workers and destroy ethical businesses. It's not the illegal alien, so to speak, that is the main focal or being villainized. It is the people that bring them here. The illegal alien is basically the product of these people. This is why legislation is written addressing the illegal alien issue. This is why legal immigration is encouraged to come to a nation with dignity, respect, and safety. Today's immigrants are walking in the steps of most other American ancestors, seeking the American dream, and contributing culturally and economically to our nation. We celebrate their industry and love of liberty of these fellow Americans. Both government and private sector must do more to foster legally present immigrants, the integration into American life to advance respect for the rule of law and the common American identity. It is a national disgrace that the first experience most new Americans have is with a dysfunctional immigration bureaucracy defined by the delay and confusion, and we will no longer tolerate these failures. The rule of law means guaranteeing law enforcement the tools and coordination to deport criminal aliens without delay. It means enforcing the law against those who overstay their visas rather than letting millions flout the generosity that gave them temporary entry. It means imposing maximum penalties on those who smuggle illegal aliens into the U.S. and for their law-breaking and for their cruel exploitation. Border security is essential to national security. In an age of terrorism, drug cartels and criminal gangs allowing millions of unidentified persons to enter and remain in this country pose grave risk to the sovereignty of the United States and the security of its people. Effective enforcement, giving our agents tools and resources they need to protect our sovereignty. Experience shows that enforcement of existing laws is effective in reducing and reversing illegal immigration. Our commitment to the rule of law means smarter enforcement of the workplace against illegal workers and law-breaking employers alike, along with those who practice identity theft and traffic in fraudulent documents. The document I'm reading from, by the way, is from the 2008 Republican platform. And with that, I thank you so much.
Gregory Lucero, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Before I start, of course, I would like to say good going to my two favorite teams right now, the Green Bay Packers and the Egyptian people. The immigration debate does not not just cover who we do or do not let into the country, but rather covers the very society in which we want to live. In this case, immigration exists as a moral issue rather than essentially a political or legal issue. We certainly hear a lot of rhetoric about how immigrants are criminals or immoral, but we almost never hear a word about the immorality of the United States policies towards immigrants, except, of course, when they call for the further brutalization of immigrants in the name of morality. All immigration has push and pull factors. Opponents of open immigration, such as the Patrick Henry Caucus and their ilk, wish to remove all the pull factors which pull immigrants from their country to the United States by making their life in the United States a living hell. Yet this approach will never work until the United States addresses its historical and ongoing injustices throughout the world, but especially in Latin America, in which American policies have pushed people to immigrate. My argument will have 5 parts. First, I will talk about the nature of moral responsibility. Second, I will talk about the structure of injustice previously and currently present in the United States. Thirdly, I will talk about how this affects Latin America and Mexico in particular. Finally, I will talk about national liberation domestically and reparations internationally as the real solution to this so-called immigration problem. First, the nature of moral responsibility has always been a difficult question. Moral responsibility can be negatively attributed when a person or nation takes a course of actions which does not help the greatest number of people, but instead helps only themselves. Moral responsibility can be negatively attributed when a person or nation creates rules for others to follow, but does not follow those rules themselves. Moral responsibility can be negatively attributed when the actions taken by a person or nation do not promote virtue and values of society, but instead pushes society towards decadence, viciousness, and inhumanity. The actions of the United States, both in its creation of economic and political crises internationally, and also its deeply immoral treatment of those refugees seeking a marginal existence in the United States, is immoral. The United States has not been a passive victim in creating the world political and economic refugee movement that affects it. The United States, if one would do well to remember, passed the Northwest Ordinances before it passed the Constitution. This law created the system for imperial expansion westward with only lip service of respect for the native indigenous people there. Soon they had swallowed all the lands from sea to shining sea and taken nearly half of Mexico. Those who would wish to deny Mexicans entry into this country would do well to remember that fact. Soon enough, the United States made its bold imperial ambitions clear without qualification. The Monroe Doctrine basically declared the entire Western Hemisphere as the playground of the United States. The United States constantly acted within its imperial ambitions, disregarding any and all rights or sovereignty in the Western Hemisphere. The United States intervened in other countries' affairs, from the Mexican-American War, the Mexican Revolution, to toppling democratic elected leaders from Chile to Guatemala. The United States holds a serious moral responsibility to these countries because of its political and military interventions. However, those forms of interventions in some ways pale in comparison to the economic damage done by the United States. The United States has engaged in economic policies which have absolutely devastated Latin America in general and Mexico in particular. Under the guise of free trade, the United States has pursued economic policies which demanded Latin American countries shred their safety net, open up their markets to the United States, and force their poorest citizens into the most desperate of situations. The United States has forced a particularly brutal economic reality on Mexico through NAFTA. The North American Free Trade Agreement, passed with the stated intention of increasing trade and prosperity between the United States and Mexico, has instead opened up Mexico for the most ruthless exploitation by the rich corporations of the United States. Just a quick view of the statistics shows the incredible damage done to the Mexican people. More than 2 million Mexican farmers lost their land because NAFTA allowed large subsidized American agricultural corporations to flood the Mexican market with cheap subsidized grain. Yet the price of corn-based tortillas, a food staple in Mexico, has increased by 50%, making food that much harder for the poor, out-of-work Mexican farmer to buy. In addition, large retail corporations have moved into Mexico, destroying an estimated 28,000 small and medium-sized businesses, throwing both the owners and the employees out of work. In addition, the wages along the border have dropped by 25%, with the combined effects of an increased labor pool and the destruction of Mexican unions by the Mexican government at NAFTA and the United States' request. The provisions of NAFTA and the Mexican government's willingness to carry them out has revealed the Mexican government to be little more than a puppet for American corporate interests. It's little wonder in this power vacuum that the cartels have gained such power and influence. Nevertheless, the United States spends millions of dollars on military aid to this corrupt Mexican government under the guise of anti-narcotics to keep the Mexican people suppressed. This has created an intolerable situation for the Mexican people. The average Mexican faces a terrible choice. The government of Mexico is far too corrupt to change. However, with American aid, it is far too powerful to overthrow. So the Mexicans must either choose to travel through the dangerous conditions to the United States, or to stay in Mexico and slowly die through starvation, sickness, and poverty. One would simply have to ask yourself, what would you do if you had to watch your family slowly wither away? The answer is clear. One would leave. One would leave by any means necessary. However, legal immigration requires that one either be rich, have a special skill, or have family within the United States. Each of these methods can literally take years to receive the green card for legal residency, and years more for citizenship. Previously, Mexican immigrants would come to work and then return home. However, the militarization of the border has made it nearly impossible for them to return home, and once they have earned enough money to survive. The policies of the United States have created a prison on both sides of the border. Below the border, families are kept in prison in the most crippling poverty. Above the border, workers are imprisoned away from their homes and their family. All of these policies have been created to serve the rich American corporate interests. The United States has a moral obligation to both of these groups of people. I have heard the anti-immigrant arguments, and none sufficiently address this. I have heard things such as, well, of course the United States stole the land from Mexico, but Mexico stole it from Spain, and Spain stole it from the Indians, and so on and so forth. That argument carries all the moral weight of a thief who says, I stole it last, so it's morally mine. Anti-immigrants say things like, I and my ancestors just didn't do those bad things. I didn't pass NAFTA. Why should I be morally responsible? The hypocrisy of this position is staggering. Either you're responsible for the actions taken and thus owe an obligation to return reparations to those you've stolen from, or you're not responsible for the actions and you have no right to the privilege of those ill-gotten gains. So if you don't think you have a responsibility for the damage done to Mexico, then you should quickly pack up your things and return back to whatever country you came from, because you are living on stolen land and you should not participate in any of this privilege. This shows, above all, the very narrow, imperialist, nationalist notion of property has no moral justification. When people talk about moral duty, it is to protect our society and sovereignty. They are doing nothing other than dressing up the most naked and ugly worship of power and violence as a moral duty. The only real solution to this problem lies in recognizing the oppressed nations and the demand for real development in the countries damaged by the United States. The core essence of national liberation stands that as long as you don't hurt others, every community has a right to self-determination and freedom to choose their destiny. Immigrant communities in the United States have a right to their own language, education, culture, religion, and customs, so long as it does not hurt you. And no, it doesn't hurt you to hear another language, different music, or see people eating different foods.
15 seconds.
Thank you. To sum up, the answer is clear. For all of those claiming the anti-immigrant position as their moral posturing, it is simply that, posturing. Thank you very much.
Eli Colley, you have 10 minutes.
Thanks, Greg. That was fantastic, sir. I used to believe like Greg when I was a young buck. Then I went to a real communist country and I saw the social justice that existed in Vietnam, and I was cured forever. My experience has taught me that while the words he said may sound good, and they may sound indignant, and they may sound righteous, nonetheless, they are empty. They're empty because people do what people do, and people look for their own advantage. And when we speak of morality, it's often thrown away, as he has indicated, in the face of self-aggrandizement and self-interest. I don't deny that's true. And that's the situation we're in today. You see very clearly where the battle lines are drawn in this debate, and it's not whether you want illegal aliens to work for cheap or not. It's, are we going to have an America or not? You saw the people that didn't stand up in respect to the flag. And this is what the Minutemen are fighting for, and this is what the people are concerned about on our side of the issue. We are frustrated because the opposition, our adversaries, and people in the Republican Party, people that we agree with on a lot of other issues, capitalism, for example, they tend to reduce this issue to one of economics. Oh, it's whether we pay them enough, or it's how much taxes they pay. It's not. This question is about whether or not we're going to survive as a nation or not. And as Charles Darwin says, survival of the fittest will prevail. And this is the struggle that we are engaged in. I can appreciate a lot that Mr. Lucero says about morality and justice. And I agree with him about Matthew. There's a lot of things that were extremely unjust in there. But as a nation, as a people who had no part in that, although perhaps we share some responsibility, and a lot of us on our side, in fact, disagree with NAFTA and want to get rid of it, and we sympathize with the campesinos and the Mexican people who've been so brutally exploited, not just by the United States, but by international capitalists. So with that, let me just go ahead and say we oppose the invasion for a number of different reasons. We are accused of being racists, bigots, haters, of wanting to deny things to immigrants, quote unquote. But it's not true. In fact, the Utah Minuteman Project is the defender of immigrants, legal immigrants. We are the defender of illegal aliens because we understand precisely how it is that they are exploited. They are exploited by the very people who get on their soapbox and talk so grandly about human rights and social justice. Every breath that is uttered by people who advocate for illegal aliens, in fact, reinforce the sanctuaries into which organized crime is feeding these illegal aliens. That is never talked about. It's never discussed. No one seems to care that when you advocate for quote-unquote illegal aliens, you are in fact supporting organized crime, as well as the rich capitalists that you so despise and derogate. And it's very interesting that the opposition prates about human rights, but yet here they are, supporting the very organizations that are undoing Mexico's government as we speak. Utah Minuteman Project is dedicated to the civil society. The civil society, perhaps I think our opposition would agree with. And what is that? It is a society in which the individual is recognized and accepted as more than an abstract statistic or faceless member of some group. a race, or a class, for example. He is a unique spiritual being with a soul and a conscience. And he is free to discover his own potential and pursue his own legitimate interests under the rule of law. Tempered, however, by the moral order in this nation, it's the Constitution, that has its foundation in faith and guides his life and all human life through the prudent exercise of justice. Judgment. Sorry about that. Judgment. So we have here a situation in which those who pander to and defend illegal aliens in the sanctuaries in which they reside seem to conflate their interests. For example, would you anticipate that individuals who are dedicated to the pursuit of social justice, in fact, by their very actions, are supporting organized crime, the smuggling networks, and in fact, helping pour money into the businesses to hire these illegal aliens? Very interesting, don't you think? We need to remember that these illegal aliens who come across our border are not merely victims. They are in fact perpetrators of crimes. They start out in Mexico or Nicaragua or Somalia or China or the Ukraine or wherever it is that they begin by paying off organized crime to get them here in the first place. So they are participants in the act of smuggling. Certainly not a moral or an ethical act by any measure of the imagination. Second thing they do, they violate the sovereignty of the United States when they cross our border. Yes. And not only that, they violate my sovereignty as a citizen of this nation. Then when they get here, the vast majority, what do they do next? Well, why? They pour more money into the smuggling cartels and organized crime by purchasing false documents. Oh yes, the document deals that are run by organized crime. Oh yeah, that's how it's done. The next thing they do is they go on to steal jobs from Americans who need them. And then they commit a wide range of crimes, from tax fraud, to identity theft, to document fraud, to welfare fraud, I-9 fraud. And there doesn't seem to be any compunction whatsoever about morality when it comes to the crimes these people commit, or the fact that the illegal aliens are in fact pouring money, their money, and the money of the people that are sending them money from the United States into the pockets of the organized crime cartels. Not a lot of morality in that regard. So we have a situation in which we need to stand up for the rule of law. We need to have sympathy for people, even the illegal aliens, who are in fact brutally exploited, as Mr. Lucero has pointed out, by the corporations, and I would say activist groups who pander to them all day long. I mean, what would USJ do if they didn't have somebody to stand up for them? It's a good question. So I think that it's important that we can come together on this issue if we recognize that the rule of law is paramount, and that the people who are receiving the most benefit are in fact the businessmen, the churches, and the organized crime cartels that are feeding illegal aliens into those sanctuaries. So with that said, I appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to the debate. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for staying on time. Now, each side will have a 5-minute rebuttal period, and I believe that will be divided by person. We'll start with Will Van Wagenen.
Was that 5 per person or just 2.5 per person?
It's 5 per person.
I thought it was 2.5 per person. I thought it was 2.5.
Okay, that's fine. The rules have been set by United for Social Justice and the Utah Minuteman Project, so we'll give each person 2.5 minutes to respond.
Okay, I'll try to make it quick. Basically, all of the problems that Eli mentioned would be solved through legalization. We are against exploitation, slavery, abuse. abuse of human rights, all these things. And one thing I really appreciate about Mike is that that's the central issue to him, and I can tell that that's the central issue to him. He's really concerned about the exploitation and the slavery, and that's our concern as well. But again, the way to solve it is through legalization, not deportation. Those who support big business, or what big business wants, is to maintain the status quo, where people have no rights, their labor is cheap, they have no way to, again, to have any redress if their employers exploit them, etc., or if they're in a slavery-like condition. That's what big business wants, is the status quo. What we want is legalization. Secondly, with the cartels, all of the money that they get by smuggling and doing all these different things would also dry up with legalization. Before 1986, when the border was militarized, immigrants, especially from Mexico, but also Central America, they used to come and go. They'd come here for a year, or just a season, for the growing season. Their families are back in Mexico or elsewhere. They'd come for a while and they'd go home. Once you start militarizing the border, once they come here, they basically have to stay, because if they ever do go back, it's so dangerous and difficult to get across the border again, they won't be able to. So again, the way to eliminate the exploitation, eliminate the cartels, is to legalize. Secondly, in regards to terrorism, if you're worried about terrorism, you need to end the causes of terrorism, which are the legitimate grievances of people in the Middle East, which are the United States military and its allies, for example, Israel, occupying countries in the Middle East, and or supporting corrupt dictators, as we see the United States has been supporting the Egyptian dictatorship for the last 30 years. If you end the legitimate grievances of Muslims in the Middle East, you will end terrorism. There's no way to prevent that by trying to secure the borders. Can you ever, you have to build a wall all the way across the Canadian border. Then, people could come in still or bring weapons in through ports. All of the 9/11 hijackers came here with legitimate visas. There's no connection between undocumented workers and terrorism at all, and I'm sick of that lie being used.
Michael Sanchez? Yes.
Well, I'd like to come into point with the slavery, which I'm agreeing with Mr. Van Wagenen. This is the one central point here, and it's also the connection with organized crime that has made it so deadly. I'm basically just a brick mason, so I don't have the high paper or anything like that, but I do a lot of reading. And the central point that I did find with all aspects of any nation, like Japan's going through an illegal immigration problem, Italy, Spain, it's all organized crime that's bringing us through. And it's true what Eli was mentioning. The very first thing a person who chooses to enter a country unlawfully will be to pay a smuggling fee. Now, one aspect where people are saying, well, it's too costly to get visas. I'm not sure the visa prices, but I do know that the cartels, mafia syndicates, wherever you are in different parts of the world, charge you an exorbitant amount of money. They'll charge, coming over the Mexican border for a Mexican, anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000. Where is a person that is making $5 a day, if it's a good paying job, can get that? If you are further south, Central America, South America, you're paying from anywhere from $20,000 and up. Where is a person making less than $5 a day going to get that money? That's a question to ponder. If you have a person that is overseas, say Asia for instance, China, they're charged about $80,000. Where's a person that's making on an average of 50 cents an hour going to come up with that much money? Well, what they do, because they are recruited to find these jobs, they are being made false promises. They sell their property, they ask their relatives for loans, and they gather this money together. Now, this can be in any country, like I was talking about. It's not just Mexico.
15 seconds.
What they don't tell you is the fact that this exploitation of money, when you get to a drop house here in the United States, here in Utah, here in Salt Lake City, that they are exploited for more money.
Thank you. So, with Valentine's Day coming up, of course, I think of the only man who celebrated Valentine's Day right, and that's Al Capone. Now, one of the funny things to keep in mind is, how did Al Capone get so rich? Well, he got so rich because of prohibition, right? When you create an illegal black market, then you can charge whatever you want for it. This is what we saw with Al Capone. Now, if you want to get rid of that black market, legalize it. Last time I checked, Smirnoff hasn't murdered a bunch of people and left them in the street, well, at least in quite some time. So if you're really concerned about the black market, about the cartels, then again, it's legalization. Just like for alcohol, legalization was the best way to combat the gangsters and the thugs. And it's disingenuous to say that we're against combating the gangsters and the thugs. We just think that this is quite clearly the best way to do it. Now, a little bit about the nationality. And whether or not, we're real Americans or what have you. My family has been in this area here, New Mexico, Texas. My grandfather only survived the Mexican Revolution because he got shot in the foot and had to return home, which was Texas, because that's where we're from. And so it's very hard for me to see the colonizers and imperialists who took away the land of not only my Mexican heritage, but also my American Indian heritage, as somehow great benefactors of me and my family. But nevertheless, my nationality is in the poor and the oppressed and the working class, whatever color and location of origin they have. So, I mean, it's very nice to have a patriotic message. And insofar as the United States is helping the poor, the oppressed, the working class, I stand with the United States. To whatever extent that it isn't, I do not. Now also, just a brief thing on rule of law. There's a lot of confusion about what rule of law is. Rule of law means if I get pulled over, I don't have to slip the cop a $50 bill to not get hauled off to jail. What it doesn't mean is we have to accept all laws as they are on the books. This narrow conception of rule of law is the same sort of narrow conception that would have supported the fugitive slave laws. It's just here the Mason-Dixon has moved a little further south.
15 seconds.
So what I would say is, right, you talk, well, of course, we don't like free trade, big corporations, or the policies of the government. But then my question is, why aren't you targeting directly the influential, the powerful, and the rich, and are instead targeting the voiceless, the weak, and the poor?
Sure why anybody chooses to live in the United States at all, considering we're so mean and so vicious and so cruel. Perhaps it's because of the tens of billions of dollars we give every single year to people who don't work or to various international causes. Just like to make a comment on what the meaning of an invasion is, just very briefly so we understand what an invasion is. An invasion is not necessarily the military use of arms to destroy and occupy another nation. My wife's people invaded what used to be called the Cham people back in the 1700s, and they did it just as the illegal aliens are doing it now in the southwestern United States. A little bit here, a little bit there, a job here, a little piece of land there. Before you knew, there were so many Vietnamese taking over the Cham's land that the Cham rose up and tried to fight them, and they ended up getting their throats cut. And now you don't hear about the Cham people anymore because they've been extinguished off the face of the planet. That is invasion, just as any Roman or Tartar or Mongol or Muslim or quote-unquote American invasion is. So let's use the correct terminology for what it is. One other thing that we need to be careful of, two quick things. I'm sick and tired of reducing this issue to one of economics alone. People that I talk to, people that are part of my group, that I hear from every day say things like, I want my country back. I don't want my kids to grow up in Mexico or Uruguay or Somalia. I want them to grow up in the United States. And that's what we care about. Economic issues aside, they're important, but they're not nearly the whole piece of the pie. And so we do ourselves a disservice when we reduce this issue to one of economics.
Okay, the next segment is a series of questions that United for Social Justice has prepared and the Utah Minutemen Project has prepared. The first question from United for Social Justice to the Utah Minutemen Project. Given that America's real wages have stagnated since the early 1970s, regardless of immigration status, and that in American history, the rise of real wages has been closely connected to unionization, why do you support the criminalization of immigrant labor, which makes it more difficult for them to organize with legalized labor?
Can I just ask for a definition of terms? I don't know what criminalization is.
If United for Social Justice would like to define that term.
When we talk about criminalized labor, we're talking about labor, someone who goes to work, and by them going to work are considered to be breaking some sort of law.
A law of the land?
Certainly.
Passed by a democratic legislation?
Oh, are you beginning your response?
You have 2 minutes to answer the
Just
question.
To whatever extent the United States government is democratic, yes.
Let me just say, in response to this question, that the illegal aliens do enough to criminalize themselves. My laws don't need to criminalize themselves. If you're saying that our laws criminalize people, what you're saying is that we should really have no laws, especially relative to the people that you prefer. And if we say we have no, if you say that we shouldn't have this particular law because it criminalizes someone's labor, then what about other laws I might disagree with or someone else might disagree with? And where do you stop? And what is the proper form in which to make those laws? And who decides what laws are just? You get into all kinds of sticky issues relative to sovereignty, relative to power and the exercise thereof, when you start questioning the democratic process and the laws that are passed through it. Simply because someone thinks a law is unjust doesn't mean that they don't have to follow it. What it does mean is that they can work through democratic processes to change the law. It doesn't mean you ignore it or facilitate those people who intend and continue to break the law.
And according to the rules set by United for Social Justice and the Utah Minutemen Project, United for Social Justice has 1 minute to respond.
Sure. Again, as Greg mentioned earlier, throughout the history of the United States, there have been a lot of terrible laws. Slavery, women can't vote, all kinds of things. And so, yeah, that is the point, is to try and work through democratic processes to make better laws, to improve the laws, and make them more just. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to work through the democratic process to, number one, block bad laws like Stephen Samstrom's bill that will further criminalize undocumented workers. And secondly, we're trying to pass good laws that will lead to legalization. So we totally agree that that's the way to do it, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, and additionally, because we have 20 seconds, it's worth noting that anyone who sat at a Woolworth's counter in the 1950s was a criminal. King was a criminal. Anyone who said, I can use the same bathroom that a white person says or uses, or I don't have to go to the back of the bus because of the color of my skin, was a criminal. So obviously that's a little bit of a problem, that those people too were criminals and they're the greatest heroes of our society.
This question is from the Utah Minutemen Project to United for Social Justice. Should you get your wish and America be overrun by the billions of all those who have an equal human right to be here if they want, how do you propose to maintain the integrity of our nation, our social practices and expectations, our institutions, and our unique American identity? On the other hand, do you deem these to have any merit whatsoever? in the face of what you obviously regard as our ethical obligation to welcome gleefully the massive waves of illegal alien invaders?
First, there are not massive waves of illegal alien invaders. Eli previously clarified the definition of an invasion, which leads to the extermination of peoples, which again is what the Europeans did when they came here. Undocumented immigrants are not invading our country. Secondly, there was, in the history of immigration in the United States, especially having to do with Mexico, there's never been this horde of people that have been coming to overrun our country. Again, previous to 1986, workers would come, they'd stay for a few years, or maybe even just for the growing season, and they'd go back. Even though wages are higher here in the United States, the culture here is different. People's families are back in Mexico, so what they would prefer is really to stay in Mexico, even if the wages here are higher. That's not the only reason that they come here. They would prefer to come, work for a while, and then go back. So to say that there's this horde of people that can only be held back by a wall just isn't accurate.
Well, and additionally, it's a crazy thought. People actually like being at home, as Will said, with their families. If you're really concerned about it, stop passing economic, military, and political policies that destabilize and overthrow countries in Latin America. Clean the beam from your own eye before picking the mote out of your neighbors. In addition, there is no American culture, and I'm tired of hearing this. You can go to East LA, and you can find a bunch of people in East LA and Compton, and they'll all be American citizens. And that culture is going to be hugely different than if you go to, say, Tallahassee and get a group of people there, or New England, or New York, or Seattle. There are different cultures within the United States, and to say you want your American back, that seems disingenuous. What America? For whom? What sort of culture? Even among so-called, white culture, there's a big difference between Massachusetts and Manassas. Thank you.
The Utah Minutemen Project has 1 minute to respond.
Well, what I'd like to say is this is actually what makes America such a wonderful place. It's bringing together all different cultures, all different religions together. That's why we're here. It's not color of skin. A lot of people make a mistake of thinking it's color of skin. It is not. It is what a person does, what a person chooses to do lawfully when they make that decision. The guest worker program, from what Mr. Wagenen was talking about, wanting people to come here working temporarily, and that's already in place. It's a guest worker program run by the federal government. Many nations have this. It's already in place, but there are flaws that need to be addressed.
The only other point that I would add is that I believe there is a national identity, unrelated to skin color, religion, national origin, or anything along those lines. And for people to think that we don't have one, I think they speak from their ignorance and their naivete.
A question from United for Social Justice for the Utah Minuteman Project. You claim to care about the crime caused by immigrants, but if so, why do you support the criminalization of immigrants to make it more difficult for them to contact and cooperate with law enforcement?
Crime's a choice. A person chooses to do that, so it doesn't matter where they're from. When you're talking about crimes caused by immigrants, what I like to know is a clarifying point. Are you talking about an unlawful person or a lawful person?
Well, I mean, that's difficult questions. I think all people are lawful. But let's say someone who has violated the current U.S. immigration law. Let's say that. Okay.
When a person chooses to come into a country illegally, it's a personal choice. They know the consequences of it. What he's asking here, is it difficult for them to contact and cooperate with law enforcement? The laws are in place now, or laws are being proposed now, such as in Senate Bill, or not Senate Bill, House Bill 70, which is Stephen Sandstrom's bill, that has a special provision that the officer upon either arresting or citing a person, has a prerogative if that person or other people come to be either a witness or have reported the crime, that the officer is not to ask them their citizenship status at all. You will find this in his bill. You will find that also, that same provision from last week in New Mexico, when the governor of New Mexico said that it's okay for officers to ask citizenship status, except if the person is a witness or is reporting a crime. So you see that these protections are in here. They're any bill. Missouri, Georgia's running the bill, Texas is running the bill. Missouri has run it, and also Oklahoma has run it. So those laws have been in effect for over 2 to 3 years, and they have those provisions protecting these people. So it's not to say that it's criminalizing the person.
I have a real problem with this. You support the criminalization of immigrants, because I don't support their crimes. Now, if I could corrupt me, they would be gone, and there wouldn't be any opportunity to quote unquote criminalize them. So that's my comment on criminalization of immigrants. They criminalize themselves by breaking the law.
United for Social Justice has 1 minute to respond.
You're absolutely right. It is a personal choice. It's a choice between going and living and staying and dying. And any sort of law that forces people into that sort of choice is deeply, deeply immoral. Yes, of course, we hear about the quote-unquote good immigrant who manages to go through the long and arduous legal process to get here. And again, it was mentioned earlier, you know, the cartels charge way more than the visa process, but it's not about money, it's about time. It's about how long can your family survive on what you have, or in the case of Mexicans, don't have. So in this case, I mean, you say they would be gone. Well, I think that's a deplorable position. Essentially, you would condemn hundreds, if not thousands of people and their family receiving remittances to death, to starvation, to lack of medical care. And for me, that's far more important than any law to increase the comfort of Americans.
The next question is from the Utah Minutemen Project to United for Social Justice. The question is, what is the central point that is common in all illegal migration issues around the world? I'm going to add slightly to that because Michael Sanchez presented earlier and said one central point is a connection with organized crime.
I would say another central point would be the problems that exist in their countries. And again, as Greg pointed out in his 10-minute comments, many of those problems are a result of U.S. foreign policy. El Salvador is a good example. In the 1980s, the United States supported one of the most murderous campaigns that I can even think of, or that I'm aware of, against the people of El Salvador, backing the right-wing military dictatorship there. That right-wing military dictatorship, with the support of U.S. advisors, committed some of the most horrible atrocities that you can imagine. And that devastated that country. And as a result, many of those people came to the United States. A lot of them came on visas at the time or had refugee or political asylum status. But when that went out, it was too dangerous for them to go home. The poverty was too bad. There was still a lot of political violence. And they would have been killed if they would have gone home. So they ended up staying here. So again, the reason that immigrants come here is because of massive problems in their countries. And again, we have a moral responsibility to help these people in those cases when our government, is directly responsible for their misery and the terrible problems that they're experiencing.
And again, as a worldwide problem, just real quick, I mean, we're in the United States, so we're talking about Latin America, but if we were in the EU, we would be talking about German and European Union destabilization of the Near East and North Africa. You can see, right, for example, the Dutch Royal Shell Corporation, which commits genocide routinely in Africa. You have the UK, who had dominated and disrupted all the, basically they control a good chunk of the world. And now those regimes also are complaining that the people that they have harmed are returning to ask for just a subsistence existence. The reason we're talking about Latin America today and not about the crimes of the UK and the EU and Japan is because we don't live there. If I lived there, I would be talking about those, and instead of Mexicans, we'd be talking about Turks.
The Utah Minutemen Project can have 1 minute and 15 seconds to respond.
I reject the proposition that the United States is responsible for anything and everything evil that happens in Latin America or in Mexico. We do not have moral, quote unquote, moral responsibility. That hasn't been clearly defined as to what that is, I don't believe. So, I have no doubt that had Mexico the power that the United States has, or any other country, and the shoe were on the other foot, I don't think that you'd find the same level of outrage and indignation coming from our adversaries relative to the poor plight of the Americans. As a matter of fact, we saw precisely that in the early years of our nationhood. And nobody had any sympathy for the Americans. We just had to deal with what we had to deal with and move on. So this whole idea about the United States has moral responsibility and that we need to be on the lookout to make sure that we can pander to and help and assist everybody and their dog just because they happen to feel like they're happen to be exploited. And also the fact that American citizens themselves are responsible for the actions of foreign corporations, international corporations, I think is absurd.
The next question from United for Social Justice for the Utah Minutemen Project. How can you uncritically support what you call rule of law when U.S. law has supported racist agendas such as slavery, the destruction of American Indians, the illegal U.S. invasion of Mexico, Jim Crow, segregation, and the Chinese Exclusion Act?
That's a deep part of our history. It's a dark part. And I personally will admit that. The slavery issue, and I'll tackle that one because that's the one I'm quite familiar with, actually was a worldwide issue back in 1789. People were trying to get rid of it, but it was going to be proving to be a long length of time. It took almost 50 years for England to divest itself of slavery. The main reason was it was such a part of their economy that they felt it would have been a threat to their national security. You used to have groups that would go around saying, well, we're not going to take any sugar because we know that one lump of sugar would contain a person's blood because that was the way it was made. Slaves died when they made it. It took over 400 years to transport into the United States or North American continent from Africa 12 million people. And it took, as I said, a length of time for the English government to get rid of it. The way they got rid of it was to begin to make the merchants responsible, begin to make the merchants, the profits that they were making, that they would lose them. And that's how they finally got rid of it. The movement came over to the United States and eventually came up through the abolitionist movement to the 1860s. And then we fought a war to take that as an issue. It was also part of the Founding Fathers. They had to deal with it when they were making the Constitution and they were thinking about the Declaration of Independence because there was a part of that that wanted to maintain that for the social economy. The same argument was there. Without slavery, who's going to provide you with your rum and your sugar? And we hear that same problem today.
United for Social Justice has 1 minute to respond.
Well, this gives me the opportunity to talk about my favorite founding father, Thomas Paine. It's not an argument that everybody else is doing something horrific and terrible, and therefore we are alleviated of it. But also, it's not an accurate claim. Thomas Paine left the United States for the French Revolution, and in 1789 through 1793, they issued the Universal Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Again, not necessarily progressive in the feminist sense, but they declared that all men were equal. And they meant it. And for a brief period in which the radical Jacobin government was in power, again, this is 1793, this is right around the time the Constitution was written with the deplorable 3/5, the Haitian slaves were free, and they were received as heroes in Paris. That is the sort of attitude and action we need to have towards immigrants today. Universal equality, universal rights.
The next question from the Utah Minutemen Project United for Social Justice. Given that you advocate open borders, anyone can come. Everyone has a right because we are all just accidents of birth here in the United States. What limits, if any, would you put on the illegal alien violation of our nation's and people's sovereignty? Where would you draw the line in terms of how many billions of people you feel is just great to migrate to the United States? Who in the world doesn't have the equal right to occupy a place in our country?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Of course, there's a false presupposition. We have open borders, then there are no illegal immigrants because they'd all be legalized. So there's that. But also, again, this is our conception. The conception of sovereignty held traditionally through the nation state is one of the king. And the king takes territory, and the king holds the territory, and it's the body of the king, the sovereign. Well, we've lopped off the top of the head of the king, and we've replaced it with the federal government. But our conception of property is still, and sovereignty is one of that, a throwback to a dirty and ugly monarchical system. So what I would say is whoever lives in an area, whoever works in the area, whoever has family in the area, has a right to have a say in the area. And that includes, families that go back to the founding fathers and, the Plymouth Pilgrims, to the 6-month-old family in, East LA that is just straight out of Chihuahua. Our conception of who we are should be who is in our community, who works with us, who lives with us, who plays with us, who goes to school with us. And that is a conception far different from the outmoded notion of the nation state.
Real quick, I'd just like to say, in all the countries, almost all the countries I visited, one is Iraq, for example. On the Iraqi border with Syria, Syrians come across the border into Iraq, Iraqis go across the border to Syria, they trade, they work together, and those are connections that have existed for hundreds and even thousands of years. So the Ottomans came and created some borders, the British came and created colonial borders and drew a line between Iraq and Syria, but that never was able to prevent that natural intercourse between the two peoples who were connected economically, geographically, culturally, linguistically, etc. So there's always going to be that movement of peoples, even if later on, long after that movement of peoples has been going on, you try to place a border and stop that flow from happening. It's just, you can't do it.
It's interesting that our adversaries use the term outmoded. The nation state is outmoded. Well, we'll have to see how that plays out over the course of time. I do not believe that nation states are outmoded. Neither do I believe that nations should not have borders. There was no problem with people across the border of Mexico coming and working, doing it legally or even time to time illegally, until life, as Mr. Lucero pointed out, so obviously due to NAFTA and some other issues, became much more difficult, so that millions and millions of people started pouring across that southern border. 20% of Mexico's population is now in the United States. And yet we are told by the opposition we don't have a right to defend our homeland, we don't have a right to defend our people, defend our families, defend our country. We have men who fought and died for that flag. We are the only nation on the face of the planet that fought a bloody civil war to put an end to slavery, something that I don't think our adversaries want to give us credit for.
The last question from United for Social Justice to the Utah Minutemen Project. As of January 10th, you say that the United States is founded as a Christian nation. Yet how do you reconcile the fact that you seek to deny aid to needy immigrant mothers and children when taking care of the poor is a fundamental tenet of the teachings of Jesus?
In the first place, I'm assuming that when he says immigrant here, he means legal presence in the United States. So I'm not an advocate of denying aid to needy immigrant children and mothers. In fact, the United States spends more money per capita than any other country taking care of the poor, taking care of the needy. All you have to do is go over here to the Utah Welfare Office, and they lay out the golden carpet for you. And not only that, they don't even ask for ID most of the time, from what I understand. I'm just joking about that. It's just a joke. So, we don't deny, I'm not in favor of denying aid to immigrants, because immigrant implies legality. I do, however, have a real problem with providing aid to illegal aliens who have no part of this social compact.
It's just to remember, the lawful immigrant is entitled to all of this. This is what we'd like to encourage all people coming into this country with safety, respect, and dignity. They can have all of this. No one's going to question them. No one's going to ask them to go home or anything like that. The lawful immigrant, from what all of you have applauded, having immigrant here, is an essential part of this country, and they deserve these benefits. It is the unlawful person who chose to come into this country unlawfully that is taking away these resources from the people that need them. These resources just don't go on forever and ever. There is a limit, and it is right for refugees. It is right for those of legal presence. It is right for the citizens to have these entitlements.
One additional thing. Anybody and everybody in this audience is free to help out any person they want, legal or illegal. Just don't take my taxpayer dollars to do it.
United for Social Justice, 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. Yeah, as we all know, Jesus never held out with criminals and tax collectors and prostitutes. This argument seems on its face absurd. I mean, it was Jesus' personal choice to flout the Pharisees in Roman law. I mean, where does this lead? If you're going to call this a Christian nation, then a basic understanding that, as a matter of fact, Jesus Christ was murdered for preaching the good news against the Romans and the Pharisees seems like a pretty big deal to me, at least.
Additionally, Eli, I find it hard to believe that you really are worried about these immigrants that come here even legally. Most of the Somalis here in Utah are refugees from a war. They did come here legally, and yet you say things like, I don't want to grow up in Somalia. I don't want to grow up in Mexico. Tom Tancredo, who was a former congressman and one of the main spokesmen for the anti-immigrant movement, he's come out and very clearly said, we need to limit immigration, both legal and illegal, because we don't want to lose our nation. It will be destroyed from both legal and illegal immigration. And the reason is because he wants a country for white people.
Time. Eli, because that was directed personally at you, I think it's only fair to give you 30 seconds to respond. If you'd like.
Any nation can require, as a condition of its nationhood, for people to assimilate into it. That means you can't bring your customs, your language, your social practices, your expectations, and force them through sheer numbers onto another nation. It's called assimilation. And by the way, my wife is an immigrant. She has done exactly the right thing.
The last question is a question from the Utah Minutemen Project to United for Social Justice. What would you do to encourage people to immigrate to a nation with dignity, respect, and safety?
Well, I mean, again, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about, certainly, again, I want to make our political position clear. We have no problem with immigrants coming here, right? We do not want to get rid of the pull factors, and we're certainly comfortable with people coming here, and by legalizing them, they don't have to go through the cartels. They don't have to live in fear and in the shadows. But also, that's not sufficient. Contrary to what Mr. Cowley would say, I don't think the United States is the source of all evil in the world, but they've got a pretty strong argument in Latin America. Guzman in Guatemala, Pinochet in Chile, Operation Condor, which was all throughout the Latin American cone, the Pershing's intervention into Mexico, NAFTA, etc. So I'm not necessarily saying the United States has a responsibility, say, for the Sudanese. I think it's certainly admirable that they would bring the Sudanese in. But also, these are not facts that can be whitewashed and say, well, we're not really responsible. There's 100,000 dead Chileans that say that we are. So, that being said, one of the best ways to protect the United States, or if you really don't want immigration here, stop screwing up other countries. Stop destroying their economy. Stop overthrowing their government. And you'll find that by and large, people like to hang out where they're born, with their family, with their culture, and with people who share similar language and customs.
The Utah Minutemen Project has 1 minute to respond.
I'd like to agree with Mr. Lucero on this, because it is these nations, the corporations that do prey upon the poor. This is what this is all about, is the exploitation of the poor. You're going to find the guest worker programs going in to exploit the poor because they recruit them and then they exploit them in such a vicious manner. This is important why we have to have legal immigration and legalized guest worker programs. We want to oversee these programs so there's none of these atrocities committed to them. Because I've read information where human trafficking and legal immigration from guest worker programs, they're almost the same, the atrocities that happen to these people. And this is what we got to have. There's plans out there that call for disposable workers, such as in Japan and Korea. That's their plan. They only want workers in here and then get rid of them, so to speak, when we're done using them. That's a disposable worker program. There's also a servient program, again, made to exploit poor people. And I think this is some common ground that we can get, is the fact that we need to protect these people as they come in. And legalization is that process.
It's time for a question and answer series. If people want to ask questions, raise your hand. We're going to try to alternate between people who are going to ask questions, perhaps favorable to the Utah Minuteman Project, and people who want to ask questions favorable to United for Social Justice.
Pick the side you're closest to, I guess.
My question is, I wrote it down so I don't drone on. While Will and Greg have done immense amounts of sociological research for this debate, the Minuteman Project has made several claims about undocumented workers which could be, in principle, empirically validated. So my question is, where are you getting the facts to support your claims? Did you read it in a book? Or are you sure that it wasn't nothing?
Can you just point out the facts that you're talking about?
Yeah, what's
For clarification?
Your claims They contribute to organized crime. So these are, again, sociological facts that could be researched and empirically validated. So what are the research?
Yeah, let me respond to that. If you work in this country and you're an illegal alien, you're committing a crime. That's a fact. If you steal identities from somebody or you purchase documents that are illegal, that's a crime. If you do not report truthfully on an I-9 form who you are and so forth, that's a crime. If you use an incorrect ID to get welfare payments or assistance of whatever nature, that's a crime. And furthermore, I would say that people many people operate under the same illusions that you just evinced. That these people are here, they're innocent, they're not doing anything wrong, when in fact they are breaking law every single day. And it's not acknowledged, it's not recognized, but nonetheless it's a fact.
Please, when you ask your questions, please ask a question concisely. Also, when a question is asked, I'll give the Utah Minutemen Project and United for Social Justice a chance to respond. Try to keep the responses to under a minute and a half.
May I respond if I get this?
Sure.
Briefly, what we look for is documentation to answer your question. I go into the U.S. State Department to get information. I go into the United Nations to get information. I go into various government agencies, various government reports. You'll find them online as you go into this. The good one is congressional reports. I can't remember all of them completely. But they give these reports and information and everything. So, for instance, as you're talking about the aspect of criminalization, you'll find the central point on this is have to reiterate again, internationally, it's organized crime. The United Nations comes out and says this is the greatest threat to all nations, to all humanity in any aspect, to all our society and our culture. You see this in what is happening in Mexico right now with the cartel war, the vicious and so on. I mean, they take their immigrants that they have and they execute them. We don't.
Would United for Social Justice like to respond as well?
Yes. Just in terms of what sources we use, I guess. Personally, in the information that I prepared today, I have some other copies of my paper that I wrote up that I gave to one of my colleagues. So again, if afterwards you want to grab one, let me know. But some of the sources I cited today were the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, even Fox News, the Congressional Budget Office, the National Bureau of Economic Research. Generally speaking, I just try to stick with, or the Cato Institute was another one, just try to stick with, credible economists that have PhDs and teach at good universities and or work for the government. So similar to Mike. So.
In addition, yeah, you know what? Other countries do execute their immigrants. By what standard is morality that other people do bad things too, so it's okay if we do it? Or somehow we're valorous because we don't do the worst atrocities against immigrants? I don't know. I don't really look to Sudan for my moral compass, but I guess if that's what we've been reduced to, then I think we're in certainly a sad state of affairs. No offense to anyone who's Sudanese, just their government is cartoon.
If I might just preface where I'm coming from with this question. My mother was born in Buenos Aires. Her grandparents are from Italy and France. My father's born in LA, in the barrio, like he's white, and his dad's born in Norway. My father-in-law is Dutch Indonesian and African. My mother-in-law is Mexican, of Spanish and Native American descent. And I've lived in 3 countries and 6 states. I think I'm pretty uniquely qualified that in my life history.
Please ask your question.
And the reason why I was reticent to stand to the Pledge of Allegiance because I didn't think it was sincere. It was a gag. Yes, sir. But I think there needs to be some preface. The 3 gentlemen on the left have been very respectful. You have been defensive and argumentative and accusative and attacking from the jump. So you talk about the organized crime, So now let's talk about organized crime in the World Bank and Monsanto and Del Monte, and explain to me how that's any different than the organized crime that you're talking about.
Organized crime is basically for money. It's from anything. It can be people, it can be drugs, it can be arms, it can be, as you're contemplating there, the monetary systems. They're in every aspect of our society around the world. They're into politics. They run the different parties. They're part of governments. So this is the problem we have to have is people being diligent in overseeing and protecting their own lives. This is a part of our government, the way it's formed up, it's citizen involvement, to try and get rid of the corrupt officials. It's not an easy thing to do. It's so interlaced, so to speak, into our society. You go down to Mexico, and I'm using that because that's a country of my heritage. That's my country of hopes and dreams. But the corruption there is just so hard, you don't know who to trust. And I'll give you an example. Mr. Lucero went with it when you gave $50 to a police officer to let you go through a traffic stop. I've been through that. You know, when you got two M16s pointing at you, and they're asking me for my identification and who I am and everything, and my cousin's busily trying to defend and tell me who I am and everything, and I'm visiting on a trip. And then in order for him to get us to go on the road is for him to place a $50 bill in the officer's hand as he turns around and puts his hand through the window. That's the corruption that you're finding. So it's worldwide, it's global, it's in the high positions. But we have to work together to get rid of it.
To respond to your question, ma'am, there's really not much difference between the World Trade Organization and those institutions against which USJ and here in the state of Utah, Utah Minuteman Project are struggling. It's just the force of law that differentiates them and how much influence and reputation and esteem they are held with in society, I believe.
The United for Social Justice has 2 minutes to respond.
Thank you very much. Also, if we could ensure that the next, in the sake of parity, if only people supportive of the Minutemen Project could raise their hand, because we've had 2 questions that, as I see it, were somewhat less than favorable. As for me, I think what really differentiates the World Trade Organization from, say, a criminal cartel is they have much, much nicer officers. But again, it's nice to just talk about the World Trade Organization. It's nice to talk about the IMF and how these are bad, terrible institutions. But of course, you know, the first law of business is the first law of crime. Follow the money. Who is the majority shareholder of the World Trade Organization? Who is the majority shareholder of the International Monetary Fund? Who is the majority shareholder of the World Bank? Who benefits through the structural readjustments? Not only in Latin America, but across the world. Now, I'm perfectly happy to say, to make a strong difference between the American people and the American government and corporations to which that government serves. I'm willing to make that distinction. But also, I'm not willing to make that distinction in distinction to the undocumented workers who are also here living and working just for the sake of simplifying the situation. The United States government and the United States, primarily the United States corporations, follow the money, are responsible for the actions of the World Trade Organization, the IMF, and the World Bank. And until the American people force the American government to put its house in order, it is hypocrisy of the highest order to demand that the poor and the destitute be criminals simply for looking for a better life.
I've just got like 5 seconds. Basically, I just like to say it's been really nice having some discussions with Mike here because of the fact that he really is concerned about slavery, exploitation, organized crime, which we are. I've actually learned a lot from Mike from being able to have a chance to talk with him just a couple times. So we share really those same concerns, and I appreciate that. we can both understand that capitalism and big business is really the cause of a lot of these problems.
For the record, I think we've had one question that was somewhat favorable to United for Social Justice and one favorable to the Utah Minutemen Project. But please let the person with the microphone know whether you're going to ask a question favorable to one of these organizations. The next question.
My question is, gentlemen, to everybody. You have a family. You see one of your relatives or multitudes of your relatives get killed. And you want safety for your family. And to cross the border is the only refuge that you have. So when you cross that border with this fear in yourself and in your family, you want to bring them to safety. Is it a crime?
No. The reason for that is all countries have programs for refugee status. That's what they get investigated for. The people that you're describing are the people that really need to have the safety to come here. Now, understanding that with the refugees, when they get here, they have to find some way of supporting themselves, having a job. Let me give you an example of what went on with Swift Meatpacking up there in Logan. The fact that you had a document mill running and providing illegal aliens with identification. When they broke that 2 years ago, basically the primary thing that the federal government was going after was the document mill. But it forced a lot of the illegal immigrants out. The people that came and replaced them were refugees. And I think these were Burmese refugees that came in and started back up there. And there's different accounts of that throughout different newspapers in the United States. This is where the refugees come in. They, in my opinion, deserve to have all the benefits that they could possibly get because they put their lives out at risk. Some of them, like the Iraqis, have fought for us, literally put their lives at risk, their families at risk, so they need to be here. There's no argument from me as to the fact that the refugees have to be here. The other part too is when you have other countries being poor, people think of this issue as just a Mexican issue. It's not. You got people coming in from Darfur, from Chad, war-torn countries. You've got people coming in from Ukraine. And this is, again, they have to have this protection.
To whatever extent that he's, said that we need to have protection for the refugees, for those fleeing war-torn countries, I completely agree with the gentleman to my left. But there's something to keep in mind, and that's Juarez looks a lot like Fallujah, and that Chiapas looks a lot like Darfur, and Colombia looks a lot like Sudan. So, in order to qualify this to just the government legal status, I mean, you can look at Colombia. Colombia I'm incredibly familiar with. It's called Plan Colombia. Basically, it was a plan to deforest peasant towns and to destroy what they saw as evil insurgents. And millions upon millions have been displaced. But the leadership of Colombia is also the drug dealers. So none of these people have an opportunity to get the refugee programs. So what is any thinking, moral human being to say to these people who are fleeing devastation? For me, it's welcome. Followed very quickly, given that we spent $8 billion and we are attempting to build 6 military bases in Colombia, by I'm sorry. And we would do well to remember that of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, war is certainly the clearest, but famine is the most pervasive.
Greg, how's it going, my friend? Greg and I are classmates at Utah Valley University. Now, inasmuch as the United States is corrupt or any government is corrupt, I don't like corruption. I don't like corruption in my own country. That's why I'm involved in politics. We can do this over here. We don't have to die like the Mexican patriots, and there are many.
Please ask your question.
Okay. I know you're not a big fan of the United States Constitution, but notwithstanding America's flaws, why do so many people want to come here, and why haven't you left yet?
That's a very good question. So, there's two things to keep in mind. The Monroe Doctrine, Manifest Destiny, World War I, World War II, in which the United States emerged as the world policeman and superpower. And this comes with perks. For example, one of the perks is you can take the resources of other countries and you get rich. And the United States has done a very good job of doing that. From Korea to Grenada to Chile to Guatemala to Colombia to Mexico.
Why do people come here?
I'm getting to that. If you are in a poverty-stricken area, you go where there are resources. It doesn't entail that the resources there are there because of some moral reason. The fact that people are willing to be slaves in a plantation is not an argument for plantations. Now, actually, the simple reason why I haven't left yet is because I actually did go to Nepal and talk to people struggling against, in this case, Indian imperialism. So if I was there, I'd be talking about India. And they said the best thing you can do is you can come to the United States and make sure that they don't strangle our revolution. Now, Barack Obama just gave the 6th largest arms deal in history, so I'm obviously not doing a good job. But if you're asking why I didn't leave, it's because here we are in the most dangerous area that does the most to attack the people's movements around the world, just look at Egypt. And it's our obligation to stop our government from carrying out immoral acts in our name.
Would the Utah Minuteman Project like to respond as well?
No, I just like to say that powers have acted in their self-interest throughout the history of time. And were any country in the position of the United States, I don't care where on the planet they are located, they would probably behave in much the same fashion that the United States has. So to point the finger at the United States in such a fashion, in such a declamatory fashion, and criticize the polity of it, and by extension the citizens of it, although you did distinguish, I think it's just wrong in my view, and it's errant, shows an errant type of thinking.
Just to clarify, the question shouldn't last any longer than 30 seconds. The answers are limited to 1 minute and 30 seconds. If you write a question on an index card, that'll usually keep you within the time limit.
Sorry, I don't have an index card. This question is mostly, I guess, directed at the Minutemen, but also at USJ. So, I don't think that in the near future we're going to see the borders open up completely. And I also don't think we have the resources to kick everybody out or completely protect all the borders because they're huge. So, what do you think would be the effect of making legal immigration more attainable for more people? How do you feel about that, and what effects do you think it would have?
That's actually a goal that we want to have. We want to encourage people to come here legally. We wouldn't be here talking about it. That's the main goal. And like I've been reiterating, you can come here with safety, respect, and dignity. Dignity, they don't have to demean themselves by assuming another person's identity and become a thief. With safety, they can bring their family and not worry about the extortion that phone call that they have to make from a drop house and trying to get enough money to come back to pay off their debt. Otherwise, they'd be executed. Those things are happening. So that's our goal. We want to find out different ways. And this is part of why we're here talking about this together, to find and establish our common ground. The part that we're working on at the legislature, getting different bills passed that will address this. You have a guest worker program that's, well, 2 of them that are being proposed right now. But my concern is, will it become legalized slavery? Because even though they propose to go along with the Labor Department's standards and protections, there's no enforcement. There's no money for the enforcements. And this was stated in many congressional meetings. Southern Poverty has a whole, and I encourage all of you, if you get to the Southern Poverty Law Center, to read a booklet that they have. It's called, it's not a booklet, it's a report, Close to Slavery. And it discusses the problems with guest worker programs.
Basically, just to piggyback off of what Mike said, kind of stole my thunder there a little bit, because I just read a report yesterday by the Southern Poverty Law Center that talks about guest worker programs. And so again, because those two things aren't going to happen anytime soon, either mass deportation or mass legalization, there's a couple of things. Of course, we would want to have at least more opportunity for people to come here legally, for sure. One big problem with some of the guest worker programs that exist right now is that if you come over as a guest worker, your guest worker visa only allows you to work for that one employer. And that's really the key thing that creates slave-like situations, because if as soon as your employer is treating you bad, or stealing your wages, or your working conditions are bad, or they're locking you up in a trailer overnight, as soon as you complain about that, you can't go to another employer. You immediately go out of status and you can be deported. And if you complain to your employer, they'll go ahead and call immigration authorities on you and have you deported. So that's the thing that traps people with the guest worker programs, is the fact that they have to work for that one company, and if they're not working for that one company, their visa is suddenly no longer valid. So any guest worker program doesn't necessarily need to lead to citizenship or staying here permanently and things like that. It can definitely be temporary in nature, and that would be helpful. But it has to give workers the ability to change employers if they want to.
And just a side note, it was the civil rights in the 60s that ended the Lucero guest worker program. So I obviously would not encourage going back against the kings of the civil rights.
And just for people's information, if you're interested in learning about how people can legally immigrate to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS.gov, has a lot of information in several different languages. Also, if you go to state.gov, the visa bulletin will let you know how long people have to wait in certain categories of employment-based immigration or family-based immigration. Many of the waiting lists exceed 15 years.
May I add also to...
Just go to state.gov in the visa bulletin. I'm not taking a side. This is, if people want further information, because I think that was an excellent question. How could we make the immigration system more efficient, more agile? Take a look at state.gov, go to the visa bulletin. You'll find the waiting list for the different categories there.
May I ask one question to the audience? How many of you here, by raise of hands, know that the state of Utah is involved with one of the largest human trafficking cases in the United States to date? This is something you should all be aware of. There was an article in it.
Michael, I'll give you 2 minutes to explain this, and then 2 minutes to United for Social Justice.
There's an article in the Desert News that's also been carried by the Tribune exposing this. These were Thailand workers, Thais that were coming in. They came in actually legally through the system. They were recruited. And as Mr. Wagner was explaining, the exploitation of them. They're held here basically because they incur huge amounts of debt. They've actually sold their property. Some of it has been in their families for thousands of years, and now it's gone because they have to repay these debts. And they were trapped at some of the hog farms and egg farms down in Delta. This is something that has given Utah a black eye, but many people turn their eyes to it. They don't want it. The farmer that, or one of the ranchers that had recruited these people stated, in fact, that he would rather have the Thai workers than immigrants coming from south of the border because they were easier to protect. He knew that they had that debt, they would run away. It is a fault that is in the system that needs to be addressed, is the fact that when these people come in, they're tied to one employer. And this is something that we should all, and I encourage all of you, we have to contact your representatives or senators because they're running 2 immigration bills concerning guest worker programs. They need to know that there should be follow-ups to their protection that has to be in there before these programs are ever in place. Otherwise, this state will be sanctioning slavery.
The United for Social Justice has 2 minutes to either respond or to explain something.
I disagree with what Mike said. Amen.
And again, the easiest solution is to grant them full labor rights. Legalize, organize, unionize. It's been a long time since we've had strong labor unions, but it's worth remembering. The biggest expansion of labor unions, right? You hear all this talk about the economy. The biggest expansion of labor unions came in the 30s. It came during the Great Depression. And it's worth noting that most of that labor was not American labor. It was labor from Eastern Europe. It was labor from Southern Europe. And the best way for workers of all varieties to increase their wages is to create a united front from both immigrant labor and native labor.
I was horrified at Mr. Lucero's explanation of how terrible and how destructive and how terrible this country is. And I was wondering why he was still here, and I guess he did answer that in a way, that he was here because Utah is the most terrible of all. So I'm really discouraged about that. But I was going to ask Mr. Van Wagenen, he mentioned that in Mexico, along the border, it's been militarized. Now, I don't know how he got that information because I understand that the military is not there. The National Guard was there, but they weren't even able to interact with the illegals at all. And where did you get information about a militarized border? I think they should because the people down there are being criminalized, are being killed, their properties being destroyed.
Thank you.
And they're not being protected.
Okay, no, that's a good question. By militarization of the border, what I mean is there are, armed agents on the border with weapons, building walls, detaining people, stopping people, etc., rather than allowing more of a free flow as existed before IRCA was passed in 1986. So maybe that's not the greatest choice of words, but in a lot of books I've read, that's the word that they use. So I didn't need to imply that the military is there, although as you mentioned, for a short time the National Guard, or there's been occasionally talk of deploying the National Guard, but just armed agents of the government basically trying to prevent people from crossing, which again is a situation that did not exist to a great degree before 1986. And then again, I'd say, maybe this was directed more at Greg, but the reason that I and Greg, for example, feel that the United States has done a lot of damage in the world is from visiting some other places. And some of the places I visited are, for example, Palestine, the occupied West Bank and Gaza, and Iraq. And as Mike mentioned, a lot of Iraqis have become refugees. There's about 3 to 4 million refugees that were that have been created as a result of the United States invasion of Iraq. Roughly 1 million Iraqis have been killed. It's just misery. It's the worst situation you can imagine in Iraq, and that's the result of the actions of our government. So here in the United States, our government treats us, citizens, pretty well. Life is great here. But when you go to places that have been affected by the United States military, where there are people who are on the wrong end of an American gun or an American bomb, you would find that there's really terrible, terrible things that the United States is doing, murdering, torturing, bombing, etc.
The Utah Minuteman Project?
Yeah, I think that what Mr. Van Wagenen was saying when he was talking about militarization is that attempts at enforcing the law are actually taking place on the border. So I think that's what he's getting at. And of course, it's not something that our adversaries necessarily agree with. So, relative to the U.S. foreign policy aspects that you just talked about, the destruction, the rapine, the killing, the murder, so on and so forth, I'm not quite sure that I buy the argument. I would appreciate it if you would send me statistics that demonstrate that. And like,
I like also that with the militarization of the border, like I opened up with my statement concerning organized crime. This is where the whole central fight is. I mean, if you're looking at an illegal alien, that's just a product that's being brought over. If look at Japan, how many of you here know that Japan's going through an illegal immigration problem like us? Okay. How many do you know Israel is doing the same thing in Egypt? How many of you know that Greece is talking about putting up a fence? So these are the problems that are common to a lot of countries. It's because you get this huge influx coming in. It's not saying that you're hating people or anything like that. It's you want people to be able to come in an orderly fashion somehow. But the fact is that organized crime, by bringing these people in, by smuggling them, has become that danger. That is the real, true enemy to address.
This question is directed at the Utah Minuteman Project. I had a business for 33 years, and 6 people used false ID, false social security numbers, who worked for me over those years, and every single one of them was quote-unquote an American and was legal and was born in this country. The issue I have with some of your statistics, you talk about how much money it costs to come here, that people are supposedly paying all of these cartels all of this money. Where are they getting the money from if they're only making $5 an hour, as you said? They're coming here, they're walking, they're coming on trains, they're hiding in trucks, they're coming across the desert by walking and by hiking to get a better life. It sounds like what you're saying is a contradiction in terms. You say
please ask your question.
You said that people have no money, yet you said they pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get here. Could you kind of connect that disconnect for me? Because it doesn't make any sense, what you're saying.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of the money that they get comes from remittances from the United States. A lot of the money they get is remittances from the United States to the home countries. Yeah, that's right. And in addition, people get together and they collect money, they borrow money. There are organizations, businesses down there that loan people money. Usually,
please allow Utah Minuteman Project to respond.
Usually these businesses are connected directly or indirectly with organized crime. They're more than willing to loan people money as long as they pay it back.
Where do you get those statistics?
Please.
Department of Homeland Security, United States State Department, trafficking in persons. There's various other organizations that are out there. United Nations actually puts out a whole enormous amount of information concerning exactly what you're talking about. This is what they track down. This is what they're trying to educate people about, the extent of how they do this. Just to read it, just to restate the fact that some of these loan sharks, and it's documented in the Desert News concerning the Thailand workers here, their loans are at 800% interest. And if they don't pay them, then they lose the property. If not, they lose the family member. The drop houses that are so explicitly coming here, these people are extorted for more money. That's what we want to do.
United for Social Justice has 1 minute 30 seconds to respond, and then I'm going to allow each group to have 2 minutes to make a closing statement.
One more question.
No, actually, do you want to respond to that question?
If someone from the Minuteman side has a question, feel free, because just for the sake of equity.
Yes. We can't take one more question? For the Minutemen?
Hold the mic closer.
The challenge is we have to wrap up within the next few minutes.
Yeah.
So,
Well, unlike
able to solve the problem as quickly as that. And that's what we're here to do, to solve the problem. And I don't want to make any ridiculous statements. I want to congratulate Mr. Lucero on his oratory competence, but I think it's kind of overshadowing the process here, which is we're trying to solve the problem. Having worked in Spain, come from Scotland, and I'm an immigrant here, travelled extensively in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize. Those places are nasty. I don't want to make any crass statements here, but how long, if you think the trend continues with illegal immigration being overrun by a different culture, it would seem like it would come to a race to the bottom. We would all come down to the level of the poorest part of Mexico. Because we just keep creating. Mexico overran its resources because they have so many people. If we could educate the Mexican women, maybe ask the question, how long do you think we could sustain the level of welfare that we give to illegal immigrants?
Yeah, well, that's all contingent on whether or not we legalize them and unionize them. Workers in this country, and in most countries, have never really been given a handout. That's a nice story that gets told. It was a fight to change the 12-hour day to a 10-hour day. It was a fight to change the 10-hour day to an 8-hour day. It was a fight to keep children out of the factories. And this is the real question. If you have a bunch of Mexican, because let's be honest, Mexico is where most of our immigrants come from. If you have a bunch of Mexican immigrants, they're forced underground. They can't unionize, they can't coordinate, they have no say in the political process, and not necessarily out of their own viciousness, but because of their systemic position, the only thing that they can focus on is making a living, taking care of their families, and keeping their heads down. Then the answer is not very long. But if you bring immigrants to light, you give them the ability to organize, to fight back, not just politically, but economically, then what you'll see is not a degradation of American society, but a flourishing of American society. And to be honest, there's one thing that people have just forgotten, which is television. Yeah, there's Spanish television, but American television does a really good job of naturalizing people. Just like in India, there used to be hundreds and thousands of dialects, but now the majority of India speaks Hindi because the stations are not in Punjab or in Hindi. So, again, for us, the solution is bring them to light, allow them to unionize, allow them to organize with American workers, and that will be the new American culture.
Unionization is having worked as a co-worker in Scotland as a union member. The business is unionized out of business. There is not one lump of coal extracted from Scottish soil anymore because the union forced that production abroad. So
I'm going to allow, the United for Social Justice has 2 minutes to make a closing statement. The Utah Minuteman Project has those same 2 minutes, not at the same time. They can respond to that comment during their closing statement.
What about a neutral question?
I think if we went to, there are 2 things for me that have kind of come out. Both the United for Social Justice and the Utah Minuteman Project are concerned about cheap labor and about reducing economic human beings essentially to economic actors, I think. Another is the crime, the challenges. Immigration clearly presents challenges and opportunities. And instead of asking a question, I would prefer that each group be allowed to make their closing statement.
We went first. You guys want to go first for closing?
It's an intractable problem. I believe that people are accurate when they say that not anytime soon is there going to be a mass deportation, and not anytime soon is there going to be mass amnesty. So, as the gentleman from Scotland pointed out, what we're involved here sooner or later, should our adversaries who advocate open borders wish, is a race to the bottom, where anybody and everybody can feel free to come to the United States and take whatever they want, legally, of course, working hard, doing what people do, but nonetheless, overrunning our society and basically destroying our polity, destroying our national identity. That's what we're worried about. And just for the record, I would like to state that we do have a national identity. And let me just run through it for you. We believe that we believe in allegiance to the Constitution and the rule of law. If you're an American, you do. We believe, actually, we are devoted to equality before the law. We believe in the acknowledgement of our Judeo-Christian heritage. You don't have to be Christian, but you have to acknowledge the heritage. English language is what binds us together. Number 5 is our tolerance. Those are the things that bind us together coast to coast. I don't care whether you are Mexican, Vietnamese, Ukrainian, or where you were born, what your skin color is, what your background is, your national origin is. And I think that's a fair statement historically. So I just like to leave you with that. That we do have a country, and it's worth saving. It's worth working hard to resolve this problem, and resolve does not mean amnesty.
United for Social Justice?
Sorry, I don't want to go over. Just, I don't know if we're taking more time. Just not. All right. Here's the thing. You'll notice the gentleman from Scotland actually mentioned, well, you know, you unionize yourself out of a job. You just go overseas. Well, that's the problem that we've been saying from the very beginning. Money has no problems traveling borders, but people do. And the reason why is because when money travels, it serves the rich, it serves the corporations, it serves the elites. And when people travel, it doesn't necessarily. So in this case, again, not one solution. It would only be a solution if the problem wasn't systemic and much bigger than just immigration. Now, something really funny to note is one thing that was said was allegiance to the Constitution and rule of law. Was that also the Constitution that considered black people 3/5 of a person? Is that also the Constitution that didn't grant voting rights to women? Or is that to the changing Constitution as it exists now? And if it exists now, then why not change it to be more inclusive and more just? And also, it's about equality under the law. Equality under the law for whom? I know if I did a lot of cocaine and crashed my car, I'd probably be spending plenty of time in jail. We know, as a matter of fact, Paris Hilton does a lot of cocaine and crashes her car, and she's just fine. So this equity under the law is only the equity of ancient Greece, the equity of the slaveholders. And also, to say the English language binds us would be quite a shock to the German immigrants at the beginning of our country, the Scots-Irish, the French, etc., etc. For me, the American identity, if it means anything at all, it is communities and workers coming together in shared struggle against oppression, against the rich, and against the elite. And that is the very essence of the new American identity we must forge, regardless of language or culture.
Thank all of you for coming. Thanks to all of our panelists. I think this was a very interesting conversation to listen to. I hope we've all learned something, and perhaps we need another conversation like this. Thank you.